It's episode 6 of the Where Have You Been podcast. I'm your host, Bill Ream, back once again. Thank you for joining us. Is there a doctor in the house? This week, there actually is. My guest this week is very accomplished, not just in his field, but also as an author, and has traveled the world, has a new book coming out soon. He's going to tell you all about it. My guest this week is Dr. Chad, and I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. And I hope that you'll leave some comments and like and subscribe once you hear this one. Here's Dr. Chad on the Where Have You Been podcast. Thank you for being here. And welcome into another episode of the Where Have You Been podcast. Today, my guest is someone who's very accomplished in many areas we have not talked about on this podcast before. And without further ado, I'm not going to introduce him myself. I'm going to let him introduce himself. Chad, my guest today. Who are you?
Hi, I'm Chad Scott. I'm from northern Minnesota, about an hour north of Duluth, and I am happy to be here. I'm happy to meet with you and your listeners, Bill. So I'm a mental health therapist. I've been doing that in the mental health field for about 25 years, and an actual therapist since 2009. I've also taught for about 18 years at a university. Along with, I moonlighted doing that. I'm a private pilot. I am an author. I have a book coming out on May 1st called Beyond the Darkness, and it's received some really good reviews. It had a USA Today best-selling author reviewed it professionally, and he had called it a absolute must-read. So I thought that was really cool. So it's a travel memoir. It's basically about my life going through a really difficult time with a divorce and illness that eventually led to a liver transplant last year. And I talk about my story as I go through a variety of various dark tourism sites, from Auschwitz to Alcatraz. I went to Hiroshima a few months back, and I've gotten some really overwhelming good response to it. We talk a lot about, it's not about the sensationalism. It's more about reflecting on the things that had happened there and what we can learn from other people's suffering. And by stepping in their shoes, how that can lead us to build stronger lives, more resilience, greater hope for the future. And it really teaches you to appreciate your life more and to live with more intention and to love more deeply. So I think it's a really good book, and I hope your listeners take a peek at it. You can find it at drchadscott.com.
Awesome. And so when you made the decision to do that, was it the chicken or the egg? Did you make the decision to write the book and you had this interest, and then you did those travels so that you could better write that book? Or did you have interest in those places first and went, you know what, this is something I should really share?
Interesting how it came about, and you can read all about it in the first chapter, actually. But so I have always had kind of an interest. Well, early on, I had an interest in the taboo, and seeing things that were just a little on the out. Like, for example, there's a place called Body Worlds where they pose people without their skin, their cadavers, and it's. I'm like, gosh, I got to go see that. That sounds crazy.
Where is that?
It's actually a traveling exhibit. Well, there's several versions of it, and they travel around, but there's also some permanent exhibits. So I went to a permanent exhibit in Berlin, and it comes out of Berlin, and that's where it all started, but it's gotten to be really big. But anyway, so you go there and you see, these people with, stripped of their skin, and they are posed in various, they're playing chess, and then you can see their brain and their nerves, and how, you can just see the intricacies of the human body. And I brought my son, and he was probably, 10, 11 years old at the time. And it was appropriate for a 10 or 11 year old. I'm like, how could this be appropriate for a 10 or 11 year old? And it was, something that both of us have, will never learn inside of a classroom. That's for sure. So,
wow.
So anyway, I was interested in things like that, and I was in Key West with my then wife, and we were actually in Hemingway's favorite bar called Sloppy Joe's.
Yeah.
And there's a guy there in his flip-flops, and he said, "You got to go check out the cemetery here." I'm like, well, that's weird. But you'd go there, and it was like just a weird, quirky cemetery with different epitaphs that said things like, devoted fan of Julio Iglesias, and, people posing, flexing their muscles without their shirts on their headstones, and it was really different. And then there's chickens roaming around like Key West, and it was really a different experience. So we actually started touring graveyards after that, me and my wife, and you'd learn so much about culture and history just walking around a graveyard.
Chickens and lizards.
Yeah, exactly, and a lot of drunk people.
Yes.
So. Yeah, and that's sort of how I got into it. I just started doing more and more of that kind of thing, and I, got to, bigger places, and and the more I got into it, the more I really, stepped into them with a real sense of reverence for the places I would go. And when I did that, when I would go to places like Arlington Cemetery, for example, I mean, it's a place of great reverence, or Gettysburg, or Pearl Harbor in the United States. One of my very favorite places that I wish everybody knew about it and everybody should go there is down by New Orleans. There's a place called the Whitney Plantation. And you would think, like, why would anybody want to go visit a plantation to see how people lived off of, taking advantage of slaves? And you go there, and it's actually tells the plantation story from the slave's point of view. And it's heartbreaking, but necessary. And I think that's how my book is. It's a heartbreaking book, but it's also necessary. And by the time you're done reading it, you feel empowered. So in an odd sense, my book is actually a self-help book.
Okay, so I definitely have to read it ASAP. So,
well, I sent it to you, darn it.
I know. Life is just so busy.
I get you.
But that's fascinating. It really is. And you actually have a couple of books that are already out there, I believe, right? You can find on your website, maybe on Amazon.
Yeah, so I did the concise edition of the book that I just published, and it actually hit multiple bestseller lists on Amazon. And it just, really has taken off. And because of that, I found a publisher in London that was willing to take it on. And they are some of the top people in all of publishing that are actually doing this book. And it has been edited so well that, I don't know, I have a hard time tooting my own horn, but I think it's, a top 5% book. I really do.
That's good. And you should.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
it's something to be proud of. Where else? You mentioned your website. Please mention it again before we go further. I just want to make sure people have a way to find you. I know that some people don't listen to the entire episodes, or they get sidetracked during, and I'd hate to have them miss out. So if you want to mention maybe the website, your socials.
Yeah, sure. It's drchadscott.com. So it's DR, the abbreviation for doctor. And so drchadscott.com. And you can read all about the book, and there's links to it. I don't know if I said, but it comes out May 1st. But right now you can get the pre-order Kindle edition, but it'll have an audiobook in June coming out. That's
perfect.
Have an awesome narrator for that. So it's gonna be really cool.
You didn't ask me, but that's okay.
Yeah, if had I known you then, maybe I would have. You got a great voice for it.
Thanks. Excellent. And do you have socials?
I'm on Facebook, and so Facebook is my main.
You're not a TikToker?
I'm not. No. I opened up an account, and I don't think I've gone on it more than twice.
No, good for you.
I do have an Instagram. I started that, but I really haven't worked on that either. But
very cool.
Yeah.
So as we head into travel itself, I want to ask you first. When did it become a thing for you? Was it at a young age you had started traveling around? You've been to a lot of places, which we'll get into. Mm-hmm. But was that something that started young, or did it develop as you got older?
Yeah, my parents love to take trips. They love to go visit their brothers and sisters in other states. So we would get in the car.
And are you from Minnesota? Is this like your hometown?
Yeah, I am actually sitting in. So I'm a private. I'm in private practice, and I'm currently sitting in the clinic that I grew up going to. I
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, I live in a different town that I grew up in, but it's like 5 miles away. So yeah.
So you grew up traveling. Your parents
Oh
used to
yeah,
take.
yeah. I got sidetracked.
I do
Yeah,
that.
so we all over the country, and my parents had a interest in history, so we stopped at a lot of historical places. I really never gave it a lot of thought. I just kind of took it for granted as a kid, and I enjoyed traveling as a young adult. My interests have changed a little bit. I would have taken a beach vacation, as my primary thing back then, and
Where
now
where did you go? Where did they take you as a kid?
all over San Diego, Florida, quite a bit. The
Out of Minnesota.
Oh yeah, out of Minnesota, quite a bit. Yeah, yeah. In Minnesota, we had frequently still in Duluth and Minneapolis all the time. I was in Minneapolis yesterday with watching a Minnesota Timberwolves game. So yeah, those are home is my absolutely favorite place. So if you ever, I love to travel. Don't get me wrong, I'm a travel writer. I love to travel, but my compass points home, and I love home. I live in probably one of the greatest cities in Minnesota, Hoyt Lakes. My son is actually the mayor. He's one of the youngest mayors in Minnesota history. He's 25, and we live. The North Shore of Lake Superior is really cool. It's kind of like I would say a similar but smaller version of like Big Sur or the Road to Hana and Maui. It's just a really cool drive. So we're really close to that, really close to Duluth, Ely, the Boundary Waters. So Hoyt Lakes is really, we have if you like camping, we have one of the nicest campgrounds in probably the state also. So yeah.
Let me ask you this only because in a prior episode, a friend of mine brought it up. Is the underwear cheaper if you go straight to the source?
Duluth Pack? No, I don't know. Or not Duluth Pack. What are they called? Yeah, I don't know. I don't buy the expensive underwear. I just get the cheap dollar store ones.
Yeah, that's all good.
No, Costco. That's where I get my underwear.
That might be too much information.
Yeah. For another episode.
I didn't know they had dollar store underwear.
It's boxers, not briefs. Yeah.
Very nice. Before we move on, actually, I'm very because you say Minnesota's home. It's always where your compass points. I'm positive that there's many beautiful things besides you mentioned the lake.
Mm-hmm.
Like where I know woods. There's lots of woods. You told me there's moose. There's lodging. There's things like that you do. But where are the places in Minnesota that are your go-tos if you got a long weekend?
Well, if I got to pick, it would be in the woods, in a cabin, looking for moose. There's a ton of moose where I live, just east of here. But I would say if it was a weekend, I really love Duluth. There's so much in Duluth. They have the Canal Park area where it's just fun to walk around. Great restaurants, great shopping, and then it's just like a beautiful long beach on the Canal Park or Park Point. I'm sorry, and it's just a real historic town. They have the lift bridge right there, and it is just real beautiful, and a cool little maritime museum in Duluth. And then the Twin Cities, of course, there's a million things to do there. It's just kind of like any other big city, but I think Minneapolis has kind of a different flair to it than any other city. It's definitely its own place. It's has a lot of what every other big city has, but it also just has more culture, I think, than a lot of places. It's certainly not like New York or New Orleans, but it's a cool place.
Definitely, I think I think a lot of people don't think of Minnesota when they think of places to go traveling for a vacation, but probably they should, and probably I should as well. But on that topic and on that note, before we move forward, just tell me a story or two that just stand out in your mind of just memories that you have traveling in your home state.
So is that before or after I quit drinking? No, I'm kidding.
You can one of each.
Yeah. Traveling in my own state. I also have a pilot's license, and one of my favorite trips is to go to the downtown St. Paul airport. It's a real old airport. It was probably one of the first in Minnesota. I think it was their main airport for many years and during the golden age of aviation. And it still has an old control tower, and there's a restaurant in that control tower, and and they'll play like the era where they, play it again, Sam, that type of piano music. And it's a really, I love that place.
Is it up in the top of the tower?
No, it's not in the top of the tower. It's in the
base.
Main base. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And, a lot of, Minnesota sports, it's heartbreaking to be a Minnesota sports fan. I actually don't even hardly follow sports in Minnesota anymore because they've broken my heart way too many times. But I love going to games, and I think Minnesota is probably one of the best. And I've been to sports games around the country. I went to the Yankees game last summer, and, I would say, the Twins games and Minnesota sports are some of the most fun to go to. The crowd is usually quite into it, and especially if you go to a hockey game here. I guess those are the main things. I just love flying around the state. It's a great state, and I really think more people should give it a try, because you get all 4 seasons, like 4 distinct seasons, so that you can, there's all kinds of winter activities and summer activities, and it's just a great place.
How often do you fly?
Not as much as we actually sold our airplane. I shared it with a couple other guys. So I haven't flown lately, but I was flying about 3 hours a month, maybe.
Awesome.
Not a ton, but enough to make it a hobby. It's an expensive hobby.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Very cool. Okay, well let's move into the bulk of what the show is about, and however you would like to go with it. Some people like to list the places. Some people just like to start with a place or two that they really, really enjoyed that stand out to them. But let's just go with, however you want to do it. Where have you been?
I guess I wrote down the places I've been in the last 2 years. So, maybe, because I know some of this is overlapping from people that you've had on. So we can kind of focus on the things maybe that you haven't talked about. Because I know you talked a little bit about Japan, and
we can do whatever you want. The biggest part for me is wherever the most impactful stories have been for you, or your favorite story. Maybe not even most impactful, but just your favorite stories that you like to tell.
Well, I'll echo your friend. It was my last international destination was Japan, and that country it blew me out of the water. I had never been there before. It's just, different from where I've been. People are people, but when you're going there, you definitely notice things, and it's very less stressful because everything runs on time. You don't have beggars. It's extremely clean everywhere. Those things for starters, but the culture itself and the food and, Shinjuku, the place in Tokyo, there's just so many cool stores and restaurants it's an amazing place. And then I actually went there to research my books. We went to Hiroshima, which is an absolute heartbreaking, place to go, especially being an American. I've toured Pearl Harbor, and then, I've toured the other side of the, now and Hiroshima. And man, you walk through there and I understand, there was a lot of intense decisions that weren't taken lightly on both sides. But you walk through there with just this gut punch feeling in your stomach, and you see kids there looking at murals of school kids the day the bomb dropped, and I wanted to cry the whole time I was there. Just thinking about it turns my stomach. But going to places like that, you when you empathize with other people's suffering, you learn so much about yourself. It creates a mirror when you walk through places like that. You see yourself in things when you empathize. So
did you talk to people or meet people when you were there, or were you pretty much kind of there on your own, doing your own like research? And
we definitely talk to people. It's usually more service people that talk English, other than going up to people and because most of them don't talk English, so it's hard to know who is and who isn't an English speaker. So so when we did find English speakers, definitely chatted people up, and that's probably the biggest difference between my, I would usually end a vacation day in the pub, and that was a great place to meet people. And I don't drink at all anymore, but I'll go in there once in a while just to hang out with locals and talk about the just kind of the day's events. And that's where a lot of times where you hear the best inside stories and places to go from things. So
sure.
Yeah. So, but the bamboo forest in Japan, walking up also and seeing, you walk up a little mountain and then find the snow monkeys up there. We went in the summer, so there was no snow, but what an experience to see, just these large group of animated monkeys. Yeah, I love Japan. And then also went to Poland, and that was also part of that was actually before I knew I was going to write the book. I just happened to go there because of my interest in history, really. And that's really what I thought I was doing, is going to these historical places. But what turns out is that they were considered dark tourism spots, which sounds a little sensationalistic, but dark tourism, really all it is going to places of historical death or suffering. And it's usually like battlefields and cemeteries and places like that, historic estates. So Poland was touring Auschwitz was another one that a little bit different vibe than Hiroshima, but you walk through there sick into your stomach, but you come out. It's kind of like going to a funeral of a relative. It's like maybe you don't want to go, maybe you don't want to go look at that open casket. But going to places like that, you kind of have to force yourself to go, and you come out a different version of yourself.
I believe that.
Yeah. So I don't, whatever spot you want to, I like with Germany, Norway, Israel, Egypt. Maybe Egypt would be a good one to get a little deeper into.
Egypt would be wonderful.
Yeah.
I have really never talked to anybody that I can think of that's been to Egypt.
Oh, really? Okay.
Mm-mm. I mean, not even in my personal life.
Yeah, I think I can walk you through my whole trip there. That's a pretty interesting place.
When did you go?
I went about a year ago. So you get there, everybody wants to give you a ride. So you pick a taxi. You see President Sisi, and like everywhere you go in Egypt, you see the president, and you wonder, like, well, is that guy that insecure? He has to have his picture everywhere, letting people know who the president is. So that was weird. I wasn't really prepared for the omnipresence of Sisi. And then I stayed, and I paid $50 for a hotel, and it was. I wish I could show you the picture right now, but $50 for a hotel room, and
we can add it to the Instagram.
Okay, yeah. So I'll send it to you later. But it's inside from my hotel room. I mean, I had I was right at the Great Pyramids, or the Great Pyramid. You can see the Great Pyramid from my room. It's just huge.
Wow.
And they had right outside the Sphinx. So for $50 hotel room, though, you got a used bar of soap, and it wasn't the world's best neighborhood, but getting there was another thing. Is driving in Cairo is, anywhere in Egypt that I saw. But
and you rented a car and drove?
I went with there's no way I would have drove. Thank God I didn't.
I feel like I've seen videos.
I didn't even have a hotel room when I got there. I think I got it at the airport when I got there. Yeah. So the cars, they just weave in and out, and it's constant honking. They're like, you can't go anywhere without hearing constant honking, and they slither in and out like snakes. I don't know how there isn't. I mean, there probably is a million accidents a day. It's just actually, I was in a taxi that hit another car, and they just kind of keep going.
Like bumper cars.
Yeah, not quite that bad, but it's close. It's yeah. And then you got dogs, wild dogs, just darting through traffic, and there's dogs everywhere. And they actually love their dogs, but there's they got a wild dog problem, and it's weird. You'll see dogs just jumping out of, not trash cans,
like dumpsters.
Dumpsters, that's the word, dumpsters. And yeah, it's quite an experience. You can hear them howling all night, and they're all over the. And it's actually a pack of dogs that go back, hundreds or thousands of years. But there's a pack of dogs right at the pyramids that, they're kind of like protectors of the pyramids. So it's really cool. I went there that night, and you can't walk anywhere, at least the places I went, without somebody trying to sell you something. Somebody, there's way too many helpful. Everybody was nice that I met. Even the people that tried to take advantage of me were really nice. I went to a cash machine really close to my hotel, and there was this little kid. He might have been 9 or 10 years old, and I put my card in the cash machine, waiting for the cash to come out, and then he tells me in just the most authoritative voice a little 9-year-old could have. He's like, "Oh, this machine's broken. You got to go down there and use that machine. You go now, go." And he tried to get me to go before I would grab my money.
Oh, geez.
So I said, nice. Yeah, I said, nice try, kid.
So there's some poor population that are trying to get
and it's really, and that's heartbreaking too. You have to really be prepared to see poverty and serious poverty when you go there. But the people for the most part seem happy, and and they like tourists. There's just so many people that need money. Like, you can't wash your hands in the bathroom or ride an elevator without somebody handing you a towel or pushing the button and wanting a tip. So
is it highly populated or overpopulated?
That I honestly don't know. It's definitely highly populated. I don't know that it's overpopulated, or if there's even a difference. I don't know.
Yeah, just curious. Like, I didn't know if there's like a homeless issue or just lower class.
Yeah, I didn't see a ton of people like sleeping on the streets, that kind of thing, but I saw a lot of, just really, people in
like a lot of places.
They weren't wearing the nicest,
tourists.
They were dirty and weren't wearing the nicest clothes and things like that. And there's garbage just, swirling everywhere. So it's sad. But
and I didn't
but there's also no, that's okay. And that's a big piece of going to places, to seeing how other people live. Like, it kind of reminds me of Costa Rica. I mean, there's a lot of poor people in Costa Rica, but they're just the happiest people. And, they're living in huts and they don't care. I mean, it's they're not necessarily keeping up the Joneses, where, a lot of us Americans, it's like, well, we need to, have that nicer camper or nicer truck, or, and it's like, well, for me, I have given up on that thought. It's like, I want to travel. So that's what I've been doing with my extra cash.
I do want to jump in actually on this, because something that's, as I've kind of listened back to some of my prior episodes, and we've talked about places like the Dominican, or like Puerto Vallarta, or even Puerto Rico, places where there is a lot of people who are living in poverty. I think we have to remind ourselves that for a lot of people, it just is their way of life. So it's okay to feel bad for somebody who's in a situation where they're in need. But for a lot of people, this is just their way of life, and they're happy, and it's okay. Yeah. So, I go to a place where I see it and I just feel like, oh my gosh, people should help them. But you know what? Maybe they don't need help. Yeah. Maybe they're just good.
Yeah, and there's studies on, the world's happiest places, and America certainly is not up on that list very high. We're one of the least happy industrialized countries in the world. So, and a lot of it has to do with, the stress of getting the next good, better, more expensive thing, and just be content with what you have. It doesn't mean you don't have goals, but your goals doesn't have to have the nicest stuff.
Right.
I mean, for example, I have an airplane. I would love a better airplane. Or I had an airplane. I sold it, but
Yeah.
but when I get another one, it doesn't have to be the nicest thing. Because you get used to it, and then it's just an airplane. They do the same thing.
I guess that's true.
Yeah.
Just some are more comfortable and larger and
right. Yeah, exactly.
Faster, smoother, whatever.
But if you're only flying 3 hours a month, and I can barely afford it now, how many hours would I be flying an expensive plane that burns more fuel?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But, so
I was going to say, I do want to hear about your experience actually visiting the pyramids and the Sphinx, and because again,
So I went into the pyramid complex, and I was with one of the guides from the hotel. He just kind of volunteered to go with me, for a tip, of course, but he went with me, and I said, I can't be by a horse. I'll get sick. And I was making the choking thing with my tongue sticking out and my head to the side. Like, that's what happens if I go on a horse, because he couldn't talk that great of English either. And he's like, oh, I understand, and he still put me on a horse. And I'm like, okay, well, we'll see. And this isn't going to be good. So sure enough, I started having an allergic reaction, and then he finally got what I was doing. And so he went and got me some, bandanas to wear around my face. And so that actually helped a little bit. So we went into the Great Pyramid, which is the biggest one there. It's not the one on the dollar bill. It's the other big one. And you go in there, and, there's a really long line to get in. There's a really long line inside of it. So that was kind of a bummer. It takes away some of the Indiana Jones feelings of going in there, because you've seen plenty of Americans dressed up like Indiana Jones walking in.
Was it hot?
No, not when I went. Yeah, it was actually perfect. And then once you get actually in the pyramid, it's pretty cool. I think it stays a relative, same temperature year round. But it was a little warm just with all the people in there, but it wasn't bad. But there's a spot where, and there's a lot of corridors you go through, and some are bigger and some are narrow and some are really narrow. So you go up this really long passageway, and it's not, you can't even have steps in there. It certainly wasn't. And actually it kind of gives you a sense of adventure, because it's not built for tourists. They didn't want people in there. They're trying to protect their the kings and things that are buried within. Khufu for that one. But it gets smaller and smaller, up there, and they don't even have steps. You have to kind of shuffle on your feet or on your knees to get up there. And, I know it came to a standstill, and, there's 100 feet below you and 100 feet above you, and you can't see the whole direction. So you really don't know how much farther you have to go. And it gets to be kind of a, for me, I'm claustrophobic, and I had to calm myself more than a couple times while I was in there. And then you get to the inner chamber, and it's, and it's pretty, it's not that big of a deal once you get to the inner chamber. But, I remember standing in there and just reflecting, like, I'm in the middle of the Great Pyramid. And he's like, how many people can say this right at this moment? And, and I do that a lot when I go to places, graveyards especially. It's like, hey, I'm standing with, Jimmy Doolittle from the Doolittle Raiders, or, it's just like you go to places. And, another thing with Egypt, you go to the Valley of the Kings, which is in Luxor, which is, a few hundred miles to the south. And, you go down the Nile River. I flew to Luxor, and you go to the Valley of the Kings, where all the pharaohs and kings are buried, or entombed, I guess. And, you go into, they have King Tut's tomb. You go in there, and you go in the same footsteps that Howard Carter, who discovered it, went. And, you can just kind of imagine this stuff as you're walking through it. And then you get in there, and then there's King Tut right there. the mummy of King Tut is still in King Tut's tomb. So you just think like, this person, how they captivated the world, which is really known more for its riches, but he's the person, that those riches were for. I mean, it's a really cool and humbling experience to go in those. And his is probably the most basic one there because he didn't live a very long life. So, he died. Gosh, how old was he? Kind of blanking on. I think he was like 17 or something like that.
Late teens, wasn't it?
Yeah, I want to say 17, but I could be wrong. I should know that. But
isn't it amazing? And I hope I don't derail you. Isn't it amazing? Some of these places that you go to, especially that are, I don't want to say necessarily like this, where you were is ancient. I mean, we're talking ancient places, but even places that aren't necessarily ancient. Like I did the Vatican some years back. And on just the way you were saying, like these places that you walk through that are meant for smaller people. Yeah. The reason for that is because people were smaller. Like we as a race have evolved and we've actually grown larger. There was nobody 6'5" or 6'3", hundreds of years ago. It just didn't. It just didn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just cool going into, with Luxor, you have the Luxor Temple and the Karnak Temple. And I actually hired an Egyptologist, which was really cool. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah. And he was from Luxor and, he was explaining all the different hieroglyphs. And I wish I could remember all the things he told me. I wish I had a recorder on him because there are so many cool facts within all those different hieroglyphs. And, and just walking through there, you can just, man, it's just such a humbling feeling.
And it has to be too, just looking at the grand scale of what they built with their hands and not having machinery like we do today to, how long it would take someone to build something like that today and to have it come out the same, and to be able to withstand. Granted, the temperature, the weather patterns are different there, which helps it to exist for as long as it has. But
right.
But still, it's amazing.
Yeah. And the reason a lot of those places, it's just the sheer manpower. A lot of people think the pyramids were slave labor, and it actually wasn't. It was just, they hired laborers and engineers, and they did it just how they would build it today, except just with way more manpower because they didn't have the machinery.
Animals.
And how perfect they can get, the architecture of those places is just like, how did they have that technology back then? Well, you know what? They had the same brains that we have. Our brains haven't evolved. So, they had the ability to problem solve, and they certainly did. I think we think people back then were dumb, but they weren't. They were very smart.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I think, it's too common to think that way.
Yeah. Another cool thing is, so there's another temple, the Hashput Temple, which is very near the Valley of the Kings. And it's really cool, but there's a temple that I went into, or not a temple, a tomb that they just had unearthed. It was a high servant of the pharaohs. His name was Meru, but I was actually one of the first people to ever go in there, probably the first American because it was only open a few days when I got to go in there to the public. And it was kind of off the beaten path. So I looked in relatively good shape, even though at that point I had my liver disease and wasn't in good shape, but I looked, I was in good shape. And so I climbed this that day was real warm. So we climbed this hill, quite a ways up the mountainside, and went into this temple that I was one of the first to ever enter. And it's like, I just thought that was so cool. And, they have the tombs really well dug out, but this one was, just discovered. So, I mean, I remember hitting my head because it was so dark in there, and you couldn't tell where the ceiling was. And I had, scrapes on my head when I came out of there. It was,
oh, geez,
that was cool. That was an Indiana Jones moment there.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Gosh, what else? When I was by the pyramids, I was with that same person that brought me to the pyramids. We were out driving around, going to other places, and he got in kind of an argument with another driver. And, and I was a little like, okay, what's going on here? Because it was kind of intense. And what ended up happening is that other driver finally drove off, but he told me that, yeah, he was trying to buy me off that guy. It's like he wanted.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, I suppose, he's willing to give him, in US money, like $50 if I would go with him, and he would be my tour guide the rest of the day or something.
Jeez.
It was just weird. Yeah. Another really cool thing is, so the Egyptian museum, so going there, it has a lot of the riches from King Tut's tomb, and his golden mask is there, his burial mask. And, and that's one of the 3 top artifacts in world history, the Rosetta Stone and the Mona Lisa and the King Tut's burial mask, the gold mask. I mean, those are the most priceless things probably on earth. So that was cool to see right up close.
And could you take pictures of stuff in there?
You couldn't, but you could stand outside the room and take pictures. So I do got pictures of the golden mask, but it's kind of at a distance, so it doesn't, it's okay.
Yeah. Which is kind of, I guess it's dark, right? So you'd have to use some sort of light to take the picture?
Yeah. I think it was light enough in there. I used to carry around one of those DSL or DSR or whatever, the camera, the bigger cameras.
Mm-hmm.
Canon Rebel is what I had. And I just got sick of carrying that thing around everywhere. So I've been just taking my cell phone, and I'm getting, awesome pictures just with an iPhone. So
oh, sure.
That's all I do nowadays. I suppose if I went on a safari, which is, I know it's one of your questions, where do you want to go next type of thing, but I really would love to go on an African safari. But then I heard your buddy say it's, $20,000-$30,000. So I'm like, oh, maybe I'll
cheating.
Put that on the back burner. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's something you definitely have to plan for. But
yeah.
Any other stories stand out to you from Egypt that were just like, this was awesome or funny or just a really cool, what did you eat? What did you eat when you were in Egypt?
I had liver disease at the time, so I really was careful to I'm not a huge foodie. I mean, I like food. I eat a lot of food, but
is there like a local dish that everybody has like on a daily basis that live there that you know of?
No, I mean, I'm sure they do, but I honestly, I don't know.
Okay.
I got actually with that $50 hotel, I got fed a feast every morning. And it was just kind of like oatmeal, and, it wasn't really anything you would find real exotic. But maybe it's because it was a $50 hotel too. I don't know. But, and I did stay at a nicer place when I was in Luxor. And that happened to be a buffet. But it was almost a buffet you would find in America. It wasn't real
exotic.
It didn't have a lot of exotic dances or dishes. So, yeah.
So anything else before we move on from Egypt?
Oh boy. Another thing that was really actually cool was went on a riverboat down the Nile.
Oh wow!
And they did a show, and there's a buffet there too. And actually, I had a lot of American food too. Come to think of it, great fettuccine Alfredo. Yeah. But the entertainment was really different. It was kind of the coolest guy there. He all he did was spin in a circle with like a cape, and he could do all these amazing tricks. And you would think that would be lame, but gosh, it was just mesmerizing. As the Egyptian music, where you got the clanging cymbals with the fingers and those types of things. It's really cool.
Yeah,
cool to see that type of stuff.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm going to steer it a little bit different because I definitely there's a place that you've been that I'm interested in. I
Sure.
hope that you have some cool stories and experiences there. And if not, we'll move on. But I'm interested in your experience in Norway.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, I got a few stories, but that is actually when. So my story is, I've had autoimmune issues for several years, and came to kind of a head, and I was diagnosed with end stage liver disease all of a sudden, just boom. Didn't have the healthiest lifestyle, but also had all these autoimmune issues kind of egging it on. And I ended up in the hospital, and I was sent for a transplant evaluation, and they said, well, we think you'll get better, and you don't need one, at least right now. And so I did a lot of touring those couple of years, and Norway was the last place I went to before I had my transplant. And I was real sick in Norway. So I guess is this long drawn on story. So I didn't get to experience a whole lot of Norway. I pretty much was just in Oslo, spent a lot of it in my hotel room, just kind of laying around. That's actually where I came across an article on dark tourism, because Netflix has a dark tourism show. And to me, that really didn't show the essence of dark tourism. It made them sound kind of like they're idiots. They're out there doing, for kind of the sensationalism of it. Yeah. And that's not what it's about. It's about, honoring and to me anyway, that's my interpretation. But anyway, I was sitting there and I read my first article on dark tourism, and that it's actually an academic discipline. And one of the people that were in it was this guy named Philip Stone, who's the world's foremost expert in dark tourism. And he actually contacted me after he read my concise edition of my book. And that was just a self-published thing, and it did really well. And he contacted me, and we sort of formed a relationship, and he actually wrote the foreword to my book coming out. So that was really cool. So it's like the world's foremost expert in dark tourism wrote my foreword for my book. So that was neat. But
that's a nice endorsement.
Yeah. I and I could have tried for a celebrity, hey, I know somebody who knows somebody type of thing that maybe I can get Andrew Zimmern or somebody to, he's a Minnesotan that I really admire for his traveling. And
did you say you know him? No, I'm just kidding.
No, yeah. So if anybody out there knows Andrew Zimmern,
by the way, our next guest. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I grew up kind of watching him. So in Norway, though, I wasn't feeling the best, but I did get to the Munch Museum, where a guy named Edvard Munch was he was a painter back in the I think it was the early 1900s, late 1800s when he was popular. But he did the Scream, the mask for the movie Scream. I believe was based off that. But his painting there, so that was a really cool museum because he has a lot of other really cool paintings, kind of in that same style. They did the Viking Museum was closed while I was there, so I didn't get to see that. The Opera House, it's kind of cool because you can walk on the roof, and it's a really good view of the bay. And there's a lot of saunas down there where people are. You can watch them taking saunas right on the ocean, and then they jump in the ocean. And actually, they have that in Duluth, Minnesota here too. What else? By far the most meaningful thing, though, it was I took a 20-minute. Actually, I think it was more than that, maybe a 40-minute train ride to a town called Drammen, which is, a little ways out of Oslo. And I tracked down my great-great-grandparents. So they helped build a church. So I went to that church. Nobody talked English. They were very, that was probably one of the cities where I had the hardest communicating, because a lot of people are talk really good Norwegian, but not great English.
Yeah.
So went to this church and finally found somebody in there that could talk good enough English so I could tell them what I was doing, because I was trying to find my great great grandparents' grave. So it's getting close to sunset, and like, oh man, I put it off too long because I was sick in my hotel room, and I had to force myself to go. And they finally got me to a person who was able to look up where the graves were. And it ended up being on the whole other side of town. So I jumped in a cab, got to the other side of town. So it was just me in this graveyard that had this chapel, and it was really a neat looking place. And, and finally got to come face to face with my great great grandparents. That was super meaningful. That was,
That's awesome. I hope you have pictures of that. I hope.
I do. Yes, I do.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah. I take pictures of everything.
How in what experience you had with those that I guess did speak English, the people in Norway?
Friendly? I have never been to a country where I was thinking like, oh, I don't like these people. These people are rude. You hear a lot of that about Paris, but I've been to Paris a few times, and I remember the very first time I went there at the very first restaurant, the waiter was kind of rude. I'm like, wow, this stereotype is true. They are kind of jerks, and that was the only person I've ever met in Paris that was like that, and, as long as you treat people well and show that you actually care about them and learn hello, learn thank you when you go to different countries.
Yes.
And that's really, you don't need to learn. Like when I went to France, I tried to learn as much as I could. And I probably sounded like a knob trying to talk French. So, I think if you just treat people like people, they're going to treat you like people too. And
yeah.
And even the people, the beggars, and in some places it's pretty intense, like Egypt. But you treat people with respect and just say no, thank you, and they get the point eventually, and they're nice.
Sure. Awesome.
So, yeah,
Norway's on my list as a place that I'd like to go. Also, there's a few Scandinavian places that I'd like to visit someday, I guess. But everyone's got a list.
I'm definitely getting back there. The fjords, it just killed me to not be able to. I mean, there's the Oslo fjord, but it's nothing like it would be up in Bergen and in north. It's supposed to be just magnificent. So,
did you say why you were in Norway? Did you already say that?
Why I was in Norway? I actually went there. Partially to find my roots, and I knew that my grandparents were there.
Okay.
I wanted to go see the fjords, and I just wasn't feeling up to it.
I just wondered if it was something that did you have it planned and then you kind of got sicker, or?
Well, the way I travel is I really don't plan. I just go.
I love it.
Yeah. So like when I went to Egypt, I was there for, I didn't have a hotel. I didn't have a hotel in Luxor. I got them when I got there.
Mm-hmm.
I do notice I do look at hotels to make sure they're in a price range that, and I found that a lot of times you can get last minute deals really cheap, and it hasn't come back to burn me very often. It has. The last time was actually in Minneapolis, where I don't know what happened, something at the airport, but the cheapest hotel room in town was $300 some, and it's usually, less than 100 where you can find hotel rooms in Minneapolis.
Listen, you're a perfect candidate. And if anyone's listening that's affiliated with them, because I'm not, there's a site that used to be called Scott's Cheap Flights, and now it's called Going. And if you've never heard of it, go on their website, check it out. It's called Going. I don't know if it's just going.com, but you put in your local airport or airports that are within your region, and they will deliver you on a daily basis cheap flights that are, whether they're mistake fares or just an airline just needs to fill a flight quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And you can get half price flights all over the world delivered to your inbox that maybe you have to book it within a day or two.
Wow.
Before it's gone. And it may be, the travel dates may be a month or two out, or maybe even further, but you kind of book it on a whim. You got to get it now. And then you're going.
Wow.
It's really wonderful. My wife.
Yeah, that sounds great. That's right up my alley. Yeah.
My wife went to Japan. God, I wish I could remember exactly how much she spent. I want to say it was around $800 round trip from Pittsburgh.
Wow.
And she just couldn't say no. Like, how do you not take that trip?
Actually, now that you say that, that was a big piece of why I went to Norway is I got it was like $750 to go to Norway. I just found this amazing deal.
Yeah, and if you can do that, like you
Yeah.
have the lifestyle that affords you to be able to do that. Ugh, I wish.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, I just wondered if that was, because you said you were pretty sick at the time, and
Yep.
I mean, I give you credit for
Yeah.
doing it and just saying,
Well,
I'm not just going to lay in bed and whatever.
Yeah, I think I got sick in Norway, so I was feeling pretty good when I went there.
Okay.
And I don't know what, if I caught a virus or I don't know what happened, but I came back to the United States, and within, I did my blood work because, I was only getting my blood work at that point every 6 months. So I came in and did my routine blood work, not feeling good, thinking, like, oh, I just got some virus or something. I didn't really necessarily know for sure it was my liver. I thought maybe it was, but didn't know.
Okay.
And it ended up being like my blood work was the worst it had ever been. And they sent me for a transplant evaluation right away. And within a month I was on the transplant list. And within a month of that, I had my first call to get, that's a rush. You get a call and, hey, we got a liver for you. And then you run down to the Twin Cities. I had it done at the University of Minnesota, which is the Mayo Clinic has nothing on the University of Minnesota. It's just a great place to go, at least for liver transplants.
How scared were you?
I wasn't. I actually wasn't.
At any point, really?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I really had a problem with anxiety, and I talk a lot about this in my book. It's one of the big parts of it is where dark tourism has really helped me become a stronger, more full person. And I think towards, my marriage came apart and I was sick with autoimmune issues and I just had so much anxiety. It ruled my life. And then I started doing a lot of like adventure tourism types of things, which, could be a whole nother episode too, I'm sure. But, I was, in Colorado of all places, you can go, help out their medical staff at they have an alligator sanctuary in Colorado where there's these giant ponds and you walk out there, without your shoes on, kicking alligators as you're walking.
Oh my gosh.
You grab them by the tail and bring them to shore and jump on their backs and grab them by the mouth. Yeah, it's insane. It's something like right out of Crocodile Hunter's show,
on purpose.
Yeah.
Like for fun.
Absolutely. And I used to have I couldn't even watch snakes on TV. And I got to the point where I took a venomous snake handling class in Florida. And, I've gone scuba diving with sharks. And just recently, last week, my biggest fear of all time, other than like family dying and stuff like that, but my biggest fear of all time is jumping out of an airplane. It's like, I could never do that. I could never do that. And I was out for a bike ride in Port Aranis, and I drove by the airport, and I'm like, airports, I love airplanes. And it's like, if you're a pilot and into aviation, you just gravitate towards airports, an airplane, you look up whenever you see a plane. And so I went to the airport and I saw the skydiving thing. I'm like, well, I'll go talk to them at least just to see what they have to say. And they said, well, we got an opening at 3:00. And I said, oh, I'll do it. And, going back, I Googled, what's the death rate of, and, but I've learned over the years, especially going through my liver transplant, and through kind of the strength of people that have gone through much worse suffering than I have, and you start to find the strength that you never had before. And I honestly, I wasn't fully diagnosed with liver cancer, but I took this, they called it a liquid biopsy from the same people who do the Cologuard test. Mm-hmm. And they said, we can almost 90 some percent find liver cancer in you. And so they found, I tested positive for liver cancer on their biopsy, and I had a lump on my liver because then they examined it and they're like, well, with those two things, you likely have, they pretty much told me for sure I had liver cancer without officially diagnosing it, but they just waited for it to grow, which has a 5% survival rate. And I I just, what can you do about it? You can't do anything about it. So I just said, I did what I could, and the things that worrying about doesn't make my cancer better. Worrying doesn't make my liver better. So, I just said, I've lived with worry all my life, and I'm not going to worry anymore. Did the guys,
what you can do about it is stay positive.
Yeah.
Which it sounds like is what you did. I mean, and I think that's the key to anything like that when you're going through something. I mean, your attitude, I think, is as important or more than the medical treatment.
Yeah. Well, and the research is, if you're an optimistic person, if you think you can beat it, you're much more likely to beat it.
Yeah.
So I kept that in my mind. I remember I just had the year anniversary on March 3rd of my liver transplant. And I saw pictures of when I was being wheelchaired down to surgery for the first time. And I don't remember having any fear, but I looked at that picture and it's like, God, I really didn't have any fear. It's just, amazing how a person who actually works on their anxiety, and, it's one of the most common mental health. I mean, as a therapist, it's the most common thing I treat by far.
Right.
And, and it's one of the most treatable things, but you just have to put in the work,
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Really amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that everything worked out for you. I wouldn't have a guest for this week.
Right? Me too. Yeah. It all worked out. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
it was a rush. That's for sure. I'll say that. And the first time I went down there, I had a dry run, so I didn't get a liver. The family actually backed out.
Oh no.
The donation. But the second time it went through and everything went, I was back to work within 5 weeks, and
wow.
Went on my first trip at about 6 weeks. I went to LA.
Just amazing.
Yeah.
There's a couple more places I want to get to before we wrap the episode, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do want to touch on France a little bit because, again, my daughter's been there. I don't know a lot of stories about when she went, but I don't know anyone else that's been there, and it's on my list. I'm like I'm sure a lot of people. But Jamaica, I'm interested in. The closest I've been in any way was I've been to Costa Rica a number of times. But if you go to the Caribbean side, it's got a very Jamaican feel. And that's my favorite area of Costa Rica. And so I do want to get to Jamaica at some point. I can't remember the name of the place that we stayed. But again, it's a different feel on the east coast of Costa Rica as well, because there's a law on the east coast that you cannot build on the shoreline. So you have to be so far back. So there's just guaranteed, there's just beach all along that can't be touched for a certain stretch of land, which really preserves it and makes it really nice. But there's so many little places that, like I said, these little towns and stuff that just have the music and the food, and it's a very Jamaican feel. I just love it.
Yeah. Costa Rica is, and I know I said I don't really have favorites, but that is very high up on my list is Costa Rica. It's such a beautiful place.
Incredible. I agree.
For somebody who likes adventure, that is the place to go hike in the rainforests and the spider monkeys jumping around, and it's such a cool, the lava.
There's nothing more cool than renting a place and laying out on the deck on a hammock and looking up and watching the monkeys swinging in the trees and playing. As long as they don't come down and grab your food or whatever else you have, which they tend to do. If
I say let them. It's
let
cute.
I have some really cool videos on the beach in Manuel Antonio National Park of them jumping down and grabbing food and running back up in the trees and eating it. It's pretty cool. It's
cool.
beautiful.
Yeah.
It's beautiful all around.
Yeah, I have this video where I was walking through, I think it's the Ariel or something, the Ariel volcano. But Arenal, yeah. So the volcano there, and but I went to the wrong part. I thought I was going to the national park, and I went to some other national type thing. But I was walking, so I got out and walked anyway, and I was like the only person there, and I had no idea. I'm a couple miles in, and all of a sudden I'm surrounded by those little white-faced monkeys, and I'm like, okay, this is weird. I kind of feel like I'm on the Wizard of Oz or something with all the monkeys, and
you were by yourself.
Yeah, and they were howling like there was one with a baby on its back, and it was so cute. I'm like, oh, a baby, and then it starts, shaking a tree like right on like just above me. It's probably 20 feet away, and it's just like showing its teeth and screaming at me, and like, oh my god! And then this giant like pig like tarpan, I think it was, that walks by the trail, and
yeah. Oh, those things are crazy looking. Yeah.
Just cool. I mean, I love Costa Rica.
Yeah, me too. We could definitely talk. I could talk a long time about Costa Rica.
Yeah.
And you're welcome to. If that's, if you have memories and things you want to talk about there, we can do that. I'm good. Just as long as we transition to Jamaica.
Well, Jamaica, honestly, I mean, every country's great, and all the people. I love Bob Marley. I love Jamaican music and reggae. I mean, I just love that stuff. But and it's really pretty. I mean, it's a pretty place. But I'm not a person to just lay on the beach all day. So we went to Negril. That's kind of the place to go, I guess. And you have Rick's Cafe there and 7 Mile Beach, and it's really pretty. And but I can only lay on the beach for so long.
Sure, me too. Yeah. I enjoy it for a while, but
yeah. And then we went to
Montego Bay,
yeah, and it rained the whole time we were in Montego Bay, so it wasn't. So we really didn't do a whole lot. My favorite thing there was so Johnny Cash had a place on, I think it was called Cinnamon Hill, and there's also a plantation there where the what it was called, what plantation? But anyway, there was a lady named Annie Palmer who oversaw this, and there's a book about her called The White Witch of at Rose Hall, the Rose Hall plantation, and it's really neat. There's a lot of ghost stories as you're going through, and there's a lot of just stories of awful slavery too. I mean, it's kind of a bizarre thing because they have ghosts walking through there, people dressed up, and it's just kind of a weird vibe, but it's really neat. And then you go out to Annie Palmer's grave, and it's an above ground tomb, and they turn out the light, and then all of a sudden you hear this loud chain, just, like about as loud as a chain could get, smashing on the ground, and you just jump. It's quite the experience. But yeah, that's really my Jamaica story. They're the people are cool, the music's great.
Tell me, I know you're not a foodie. Tell me the food was great.
Yeah, we ate, and that was before my liver disease. So there was
so you had cocktails too.
Some great drinks made there. They have like the rum is to die for, but not literally, because I quit drinking. Because it would kill me if I drank it now. Let's see. They had people walking up and down the beach all the time. Like literally within the first 2 minutes, I was offered cocaine and marijuana. I'm on the beach.
Really?
Yeah, and I'm like, I'm no, but you also have people offering more legit things like lobster tails. So we ate lobster tails right from a guy, walking the beach, asking if you wanted lobster tails.
Wow.
Yeah. So they had a lot of the jerk chicken is to die for. The best night I had there, I think, was we went to I think it was Bob Marley's birthday, and they had a Bob Marley documentary and a reggae band playing at this, and most of the people there were Jamaican, and they were making jerk chicken on the barbecue, and it was a kind of a magical night there.
And not expensive, right? Food and drinks and
I don't remember, but I don't think so. I think it was really reasonable.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Let's touch on, if you don't mind, touch on France, and if we want to spend a little bit of time on Costa Rica, I'm really glad to do that.
Yeah, so France, what can I say about France?
Why did you go? Was it just a vacation?
Well, so the first time I went, I was married. We were just a couple years into our marriage, so it was, we went there for her birthday. And
that's a hell of a birthday gift.
Yeah, I was a hell of a husband. So if there's any single women out there that want a hell of a husband who is a best-selling author, no. But
I'll add your phone number at the end.
yeah, exactly. You better put my picture by it too. I'm okay. I'm a solid 8.
You're a handsome man.
No, yeah. No, I'm not. So we went there. You go to the Notre Dame Cathedral, which is that was before the fire. I've been there a couple times before the fire, and it's just the gothicness of that is you go in there and you just you get these chills just from looking at the gargoyles and it's really hard to explain. It's just a different atmosphere in there. The best I can say is it's probably what you think. It's really a magnificent Gothic church. And then my wife was really kind of before we knew we were dark tourists, we were into a lot of dark tourism. So they have the Père Lachaise cemetery there and Oscar Wilde, but my favorite was Jim Morrison's buried there.
Really?
He died in Paris, and they didn't want to bring him to the United States and cause have a big to do for him. He didn't want that, so they figured he'd just want to stay in Paris, and he loved Paris. So,
wow.
So they buried, yeah. So that was cool to go visit one of my childhood. I grew up. I mean, he was passed probably before I was even born, but loved driving around, listening to him, heading to parties and things as a kid. And yeah. But probably the coolest thing for a dark tourist in Paris is the Paris catacombs. So what the Paris catacombs are is back in the 1800s, they had their cemeteries are just overflowing. I mean, they're, people, they'd have floods, and then you'd have, people that were buried are, they're people on top of people. So you would have people popping out of the graves, and it was just like a real, and there was a stench and things. So what they did is they had this huge operation where they put people in the quarries underneath the, Paris. There's, I don't know if it's hundreds of miles, but there's, many miles of tunnels underneath Paris, a couple hundred feet down. And so we went down there, and I've been down there a couple of times where, you go down this really kind of creepy spiral staircase, and you get into the ossuary of the catacombs, and there is bones from, probably 6 feet high, 6 feet deep on both sides of you. And you're walking through miles. Well, it's over a mile, the part that the public goes through. And it's just such an experience to see that many skeletons and bones. And you'd think it would be super creepy and scary. And it wasn't. It really gives you a different perspective on like, gosh, this is going to be me. Everyone in here were like me. They were living, breathing people. They had people that loved them. They loved people. They, what did they do? How did they die? You go through thinking that kind of stuff. And when you come out the other side, it's just, it just makes you realize, like, yes, I'm going to die. It's something that they call memento mori, where it's like, remember you're going to die. And that means, it goes back to Roman times where they've used that saying. And it's like, you're going to die. So live your life, live like you're dying, don't waste a second. And that's how I live my life.
I don't remember which city it was in Italy. And I know you've been to Italy. Did you ever get to the Bone Church?
You know what? I never did. No. I think that's I want to say Spain.
Maybe there's more than one.
Yeah, there is. There's several bone churches out there.
But we went to the Bone Church. It was our last trip there. It was a couple of years ago. It was either in, I don't know if it was Bologna. It doesn't matter. But it was incredible. And it's like you're saying. And you go down into the catacombs and just bones on bones on bones on bones. The only thing that disappointed me, and this is just me, I guess, being I don't know, fickle or whatever, but they were very much what we saw as tourists. It was very much arranged, and it was like all these bins, all this long walkway of bones and which still it's humbling and it's incredible.
Yeah,
and, but it was just like, yeah, but I don't know. I guess you'd have to see it, but it was still really incredible, and especially the church itself was just amazing. Like there's a massive chandelier in the middle of it that is literally made of human bones. It's incredible. But,
I know I on my website, here's a little extra thing if anybody goes to my website, but I have, I don't know if it's quite 100, but probably in the 70s, but I have all these different dark tourism destinations. And a lot of them, some of them I didn't go to. Most of them I think I've been to, but it gives a description in a picture. And I think the picture I have on there of that, it might be the same church you went to, but it really, the chandeliers are out of bones, and yeah,
it's really incredible.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to distract from what you were saying.
Some France?
That was amazing, though.
Yeah, so France, getting back to France, I think, as an American especially, but as a lover of the free world, going to Normandy, my God, that walking on the beach in Normandy, you just kind of picture, or looking over the cliffs at the ocean, and you can almost picture the ships coming in and the people storming the beaches. And there's still a lot of Nazi pillboxes, the cement, bunkers that they had. And there's a lot of, the Allies bombed the beaches for days before the invasion. And so there's giant craters, and, I went into one Nazi pillbox and the ceilings are burnt, and I assume it's from people with flamethrowers. Yeah, that is another.
Isn't it one of those things that it's experience. Like you have to remind yourself? I think you sort of alluded to this earlier with a different topic, but yeah, you have to remind yourself that this isn't something that was built as a replica to show you what it was like in what we read in history books. This is the actual place. This is actually where soldiers stood and people lost their lives, and whatever. It's to remind yourself of that. It's to me, it's just humbling is, I don't know if that's even the right word, but
reverence. I don't know.
Reverence. Mm-hmm.
It's definitely an experience. And, and knowing, the story behind D-Day 2 is where they had Operation Overlord, where they tried to, they had, tried to trick the Nazis into thinking we were going to come to a different spot. So all their good troops went to a different spot. So Normandy was actually protected by like old men Nazis and kids, and that's who were protecting the beach for the most part. And, just thinking like, these are people that had to fight for Hitler. It's not like, it's not fun to go kill Nazis. It's, these are people. This isn't a video game. These are like little kids that had to fight for Adolf Hitler.
Right.
So you, like, I always think, I talk about my book where I was smiling in front of a plane called Boxcar. And it was the plane that bombed Nagasaki, and I saw it as like, okay, my grandpa was in the war, and, and this is the plane that ended, and that was, 15 years ago I took this picture, and I'm smiling. And I look at that picture now, it's like, you idiot, it's like, do you know, what does that plane actually represent? It represents like nuclear devastation and killing civilians. And, yes, it had helped to end the war. And, and I'm not saying we shouldn't have done it or, but maybe we shouldn't have,
Yeah.
I wasn't there to make that decision, but
yeah,
it's just like, it's history. And that's why I go to these places. So a good side trip out of Paris is Normandy. They have the Normandy American Cemetery there where, it has, a lot of the troops that died in Normandy. Moulin Rouge is cool. I've been there a couple times. It was an experience for my son. I brought him I brought him to Paris for his high school graduation. So that was quite the experience for him. And probably the first time he saw, dancing girls and, in the more risque mode. Yeah, it was a cool thing.
That you know of.
Yeah. Probably the first time he legally drank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. And then the Palace of Versailles is not very far either. So that's another really cool place where, I think we spent the whole day there. Just thought it'd be a place to go, let's go see Versailles quick. And we spent the whole day there. And then you go out into their enchanted forest area and gardens. And it's just a magnificent place. And actually, if you want to look at where World War I ended and World War II really began, it's in that they got a magnificent hall of mirrors in there. And it's just, it's beautiful, and it's, opulence is beyond grand, and it's where they signed the Treaty of Versailles, which ended World War I, but it put out such strong restrictions on Germany that was a major catalyst for why, the Nazi Party took over and why we had World War II.
Yeah. I think what I'm realizing is we should probably reconnect down the road and have a second episode, because I think there's probably a lot of stories left that we're not going to be able to get to keep this at a reasonable amount of time.
Sure.
So if you're willing, I would love to have you back again down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been fun.
And who knows, maybe you'll have some more travels that you can talk about. It seems like you tend to go at whatever chance you get.
I got 130,000 frequent fire miles burning a hole in my pocket. So
nice.
Yeah. We're gonna
come to Pittsburgh, and then we'll fly out together.
Yeah,
somewhere.
Good. Yeah.
I do have a few questions before we wrap.
Sure.
I did want to get to Costa Rica, but I think we should probably save it for another day. And again, I think you and I could probably talk for some time. It sounds like about that place.
Yeah.
So, and you've heard my questions before, but I want to know if there's a place that you've been to that, for whatever reason, good or bad, doesn't matter. Just if you don't go back, it's okay. You're okay if you never go back.
Yeah. Actually, you had a guest on that kind of, in a way, was the same sentiment I have. It's like, I want to see so many places. I want to get to Edinburgh, and I want to, I want to see it all. But if there's one place I don't care to go back to, it's, I hate to say it, but Jamaica.
Okay.
I think anybody who loves the beach should go to Jamaica. I love the beach, but I don't want to spend a week on the beach. And I guess and for other people, that is their idea of tourism, and that's fine. And there's a great culture there, without a doubt.
Very fair. Hey, everyone to each their own.
And if I went there again, maybe I would go to Kingston, and get more into the nitty gritty real culture of Jamaica.
Sure. So. When you go places, do you try, obviously, like, it's hard to go somewhere that has landmarks and things that are so famous that how do you go there and not visit these places? But notwithstanding the dark tourism and things like that, do you try to specifically go off the beaten path and kind of create your own experiences that aren't in travel books, or not necessarily?
Well, what I do, here's how I travel, and it's taken years to get to this point. So I almost will always buy a travel book, and read it, and I'll throw it in the bag, and I almost never really take it out after that. But so I kind of have a sense of what I'm getting into. And then I just go to the city. Like, I went to Israel, and I had a hotel room for the first night. And then I'm just like, okay, then I'm just going to let
life take you.
Let life take me. Yeah. And so that's what I do. When I went to Japan, though, something that I think is really useful, and I think it's probably going to take over a lot of these travel books even, is, so I went on ChatGPT, and I made my own travel book. I mean, I bought the travel books for Japan, but I also made my own. I said, I like dark tourism and I like culture and I like, talked about the various things that I enjoyed, animals, and it threw out, kind of this itinerary for me, and it, told me what trains to take, and, and it got to the nitty gritty of, how much things cost, and it kind of rated things for me, and it, based on my preferences, not the preferences of somebody like
Rick Steves.
Rick Steves, exactly. Yeah.
You're welcome to be a guest, Rick.
I love Rick Steves. Don't get me wrong. I actually, the last book I got on Edinburgh is a Rick Steves book. So
yeah.
No, I think they're going to be in good shape for many years to come.
Sure. That's amazing though. I didn't even think about that as a planning tool.
Yeah.
To be able to
what
really...
else is cool? In Japan, I could take pictures of menus and signs and say, what does this say? And it would tell you what it says. And it was,
sure. I've used Google Translate, the Google Lens, many times in other countries just to understand.
Yeah.
No, very cool. I appreciate that insight to how you travel. It's important to me because that's something that I like to see the sites because I want to say I can't. It's hard to go to somewhere and say, well, you went to, for example, Paris and you didn't see the Eiffel Tower. Like, how does that happen?
Yeah.
And I haven't been there, but.
Yeah. It's almost impossible for that not to happen because you see it
for sure
so many spots.
Yeah. But to me, I'm more interested in getting immersed in the local culture and learning more about the people. And I love having the local meals and really getting to learn about that stuff and talking to people. But again, to each their own. Everyone travels differently, but I'm really interested in that. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
I want to know of the places that you've been. Because I know you want to see as many places as you can, it sounds like. The world is vast. But where is a place that you just absolutely, I want to get back there at some point?
Oh, get back there. Israel. I loved Israel. I can't wait for it to be a little safer. I went there just before everything kind of went down. I actually went there on the same trip I went to when I went to Egypt. I went to hit both those places. And, and it was an interesting thing too, is like, I never had planned to go to Israel, but when I got sick, there's a saying, there's no atheists in foxholes. And, and I grew up Catholic and, to go there and it's like, I kind of had to do this crunch course on Christianity, but, I went there and I did. And, Israel's so cool because there's like everything's there that you read about, or I shouldn't say I've read the Bible. I've been told things about the Bible, and they're all there. And I walked with monks right from where he was condemned to. You can put your hand right where the cross stood, and there's a crack in a rock right next to the where the cross was, which is said to be the earthquake when that hit the second he died. And, sure enough, that rock is there. And you can go into the tomb where, and then a few miles away, you can go to Bethlehem, which is actually in the West Bank of Palestine. And that's another, really humbling place to be. So where was I going with that though? So that would be the place I would go back. And what I really learned about that is, the people intermingled, that the Muslims and the Jews and the Christians. I mean, they intermingled for the most part. There were spots where Muslims weren't allowed, and there's a spot where I wanted to see the Dome on the Rock, or I can't think of the name of it, but where they have the big rock where Muhammad went to heaven, and it was the pillar of like the rock that the world was built off of in Jewish tradition. And, and I tried to get in there and they stopped me with machine guns. So I didn't go in, but,
good move.
Yeah, I thought so. But there's so much history there in it. But what I found is that it's just like such a small percentage of people that hate each other there. It's, it's like 0.5% maybe that really dislike each other. And other than that, everybody's friendly. I was never scared. Each zone of the old city of Jerusalem is, it's so cool and unique. And I would go back there and, I say in my book, I didn't come out a sweater wearing churchgoer, but it was to see how much it meant to so many people. It just made me more spiritual, so it was cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
As a non-foodie, was there one favorite meal you can think of in any place that you've been? And it doesn't have to be outside the U.S. We didn't even talk about places you've been in the U.S. But,
well, you know what? Deep dish pizza in Chicago.
All right.
For a picky eater, deep dish pizza in Chicago at Pizza Uno or Pizza Duo.
Okay.
Which
I was
is
going to ask you a place. Okay.
Yep. Pizza Uno or Pizza Duo. And it's not the Pizzeria Uno chain store.
Nope.
It may have come out of that, but I'm talking like the legit original. I love it. I would go to Chicago just for that.
Okay. You know that my buddy Renato, episode 4, lives in Chicago. He took me to Pequod's, and Pequod's was the place that he...
Okay.
But that was... so we have some competition. We'll have to see what happens.
Yeah.
I'll have to tell him.
Yeah. But, you'll have to tell me what he thinks.
But honestly, you're right. I mean, the deep dish pizza, and I only tried it at the one place, but it was... you get a pizza right and a deep dish, it's so good.
Yeah, you can't beat it, hands down. Best thing you can eat.
Any story that you haven't told us that was just crazy, insane, near death, just out of this world bonkers that, just wow.
Probably nothing I can tell on the air, but you know what? I will tell one. This is one that's going to embarrass the hell out of my mom, but I'm going to tell it.
She won't listen.
So I am all about, I talk about this every day with my anxious clients. Like, you have to step outside your comfort zone. You have to push out your comfort zone. You have to face your fears. If you have a fear of social anxiety, you have to, go put yourself in social situations. That's the only way you're going to reduce your anxiety, is by facing your fears. If you have trauma, you got to, face your fear of that memory, and you talk about your trauma. So I, other than the locker room, or maybe the sauna once in a while, you don't go around naked. And I've always would I go to a nude beach? So anyway, I was in Miami, and I drove by a nude beach. I'm like, you know what? I can't say no to one of my fears. So I went skinny dipping on South Beach. There's a portion of it where it's all nude. So that's my crazy story.
Ladies.
So he's
got DR in front of his name. He's a handsome bachelor, and he doesn't mind going nude.
That's right.
Checks off all the boxes.
Yeah. Who doesn't want that?
My ratings just skyrocketed.
So they should.
Like and subscribe and comment. So
absolutely.
I guess the last thing we'll wrap with is, where are you going? What do you have planned?
Well, I'm going to Boston, do a trauma conference in about a month, which I'm pretty excited for. Bezel van der Kolk, who's got probably one of the most famous books out there on The Body Keeps the Score. So he's the big presenter there. Other than that, I really want to get to Edinburgh, and I really want to get to, probably Kruger National Park in South Africa.
Not necessarily actually planned, but you plan to plan it.
I plan to plan. Yeah, I'm going to go somewhere, and those are my two. I may go to London and have a book event there. There's a place called 10 Bells Pub, and that was where two of Jack the Ripper's victims were last seen. So they're kind of a famous place, and I'd talked to them about having an event there, and they're open to it. So I may be going there to do that. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Anything we missed? Anything? I want to have you on again, because I know that we missed a ton of stuff. We didn't touch on so many places that you've been, so I'm sure you have tons more stories. But anything that you want to add before we? Well,
just the most important thing, which is Beyond the Darkness, comes out May 1st.
Mm-hmm.
Bookstores everywhere, and right now the pre-order is on Amazon. But
yeah.
Yeah, and actually I just got Did I talk about that on this podcast?
Yeah,
about
the review that you got?
The review, yeah. So
mention it again.
I've had three 5-star reviews, and they're saying it's a absolute must read. So
and it's not even released. So
yeah, right. Yeah.
Awesome. I can't wait to read it myself.
Yeah, the early feedback's been good.
So this has really been awesome. I appreciate you so much for taking the time. And again, like we will definitely.
Yeah. I enjoyed it. I really appreciate having me on, Bill. And
I hope you had fun.
Maybe we'll see you in Pittsburgh, or maybe we'll see you next time on here again.
Yeah, absolutely. Hope you had a good time.
Yeah, I did. Definitely.
Awesome.
Another fantastic episode in the books. I hope that you'll agree. Thank you so much again to Dr. Chad for your time and for sharing such wonderful stories. We'll be back again, of course, like always, with episode 7 coming up in a very short while. And I hope that you'll be back to listen to that as well. Please like, subscribe, whatever. Leave a comment. Please leave a comment. I'd like to hear from you. I want to hear some feedback from you on the show. And I'd like to just be able to interact with you a little bit and listen to what you have to say. So thank you for being here once again on the Where Have You Been podcast. Have a great day.